by Billionaire Mom Chapter 2. Yes, the cheapest one is $12,000, which means that a house of 100 square meters costs about $1 million. Even the smallest apartment costs $50,000 or $60,000. You must listen carefully, sir. Natalie Xavier was very dismissive of this kind of person who was overconfident and maliciously delayed time. Well, Chuck Cannon didn't finish his words. At this time, a pot-bellied man walked into the real estate agency. The gold necklace on his neck was thicker than his fingers, and he looked like a rich man at first glance. Natalie immediately chose to leave Chuck aside and greeted the man with a smile. It was totally different from the way she treated Chuck. When Natalie saw the fat man, she immediately put on a happy smile. "Sir, do you want to buy a house?" "Yes, I want to buy a house." "Introduce some high-quality housing sources to me." Natalie smiled even more happily. Yes. We have plenty of high-quality houses for you with our high-end services. Unlike some people who come to us even when they can't afford it. It's a waste of time." Natalie gave Chuck a disdainful look as she spoke, implying and cursing him. Chuck looked at Natalie's attitude and felt disheartened. He was used to being looked down upon. At that time, he didn't dare to say anything because he didn't have any money. But now, he had $5 million. How could he swallow such humiliation? "Where is your manager? Call your manager over." Hearing Chuck's words, Natalie sneered, and said, "Do people like you still have the right to meet our manager? Don't make a fool of yourself here. Get out of here. Do you know that wasting our time affects how much money we make?" The manager walked slowly over at this time. As a service industry, it was a taboo to be rude to customers. "What's going on, Natalie?" Natalie hurriedly explained, "Sir, this broke idiot isn't trying to buy a house. He just wants to enjoy the air conditioning here. I'll get him out of here immediately." The manager eyeballed Chuck's clothes from top to bottom and saw that he was dressed ordinarily. Indeed, as Natalie said, he didn't look like someone who could afford to buy a house. More importantly, he was too young to buy a house, as he looked just 18 or 19 years old. No one would believe he had the ability to. Chuck did not say anything. He stood up and walked to the real estate agency next door. "Can't afford a house? Seems that you're not the only real estate agency here." Natalie looked down on him. "How is a poor person like you able to buy a house? You can't even afford to buy a toilet." Some employees laughed at him. He's afraid of making a fool of himself. He quickly found an excuse to run away. He said he wanted to go next door, but he just might be trying to take advantage of the air conditioning there too. "Still pretending even when you're gone," Natalie sneered. They were familiar with the next door real estate agency, they also knew whether they could sell it or not. After watching Chuck leave, Natalie hurriedly ran to the fatty and smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry to keep you, boss. Sorry to keep you waiting." The fatty shook his head and said, "It's okay. It's okay." However, no matter how Natalie greeted him with a smile, the fatty never talked about money. In the end, Natalie's patience was exhausted and she even began to plead. At this moment, all the employees of the real estate agency looked outside. Under the respectful guidance of the staff next door, Chuck got into the Mercedes-Benz, which was specially used to take a customer to see a room. What was going on? Generally speaking, only a person who bought a house could enter this car. Didn't the next door real estate agency see that this rascal didn't have the ability to buy a house at all? The fatty saw that the people here was distracted, so he quickly sneaked out. Natalie turned around and looked at the customer that just disappeared. She was so angry that she stomped her feet. She didn't expect that the fatty, who was putting on airs and graces, was actually here to enjoy the air conditioning too. Natalie looked at Chuck disgustedly and disliked him even more. She sneered and said, "Such a pretentious person. Even imitating others to inspect a house." At this time, an employee next door came quickly. He opened the door and said, "Thank you. You sent such an important customer to our company. We haven't run into any big business in the past 2 years. Today is a big day." "Important customer?" The manager's face darkened and he immediately asked, "What did he buy?" He bought a house worth more than $3 million with a deposit of $1 million. The business should be successful. "Thank you. I'll treat you to a cup of milk tea later." After that, the employee got on the Mercedes-Benz and took Chuck to take a look at the house. Really, bought it? Natalie's face was full of disbelief. Looking at Chuck, who was sitting in the Mercedes-Benz with a smile on his face, she felt very uncomfortable. How could it be possible? He is so poor, how could he afford to buy a house? Smack. Before she could blame herself, the manager raised his hand and slapped her in the face. His eyes were almost bursting out flames. Look at what you've done. If the transaction was successful, the employees who have dealt with him would have been given a 5% commission, which would have been around $150,000. As for the manager, he would have gotten a 10% commission amounting to $300,000. But now, the manager trembled with anger when he thought of $300,000 gone with the wind. He kicked Natalie and said, "Get out. You're fired. Get out." Natalie was also losing her mind. Ignoring the pain on her body, she quickly ran outside and threw herself on the BMW. She knocked on the window repeatedly and looked at Chuck, sobbing, Sir, I am sorry. I am really sorry. I failed to recognize your wealth before and I'm a snob. Please give me another chance. We have better houses here." Chuck shook his head and said, "It's all right. You can save it for the other customers." After that, the Mercedes-Benz started in a hurry. Natalie chased after him all the way and finally sat on the ground. She looked weakly at the Mercedes-Benz getting farther and farther away. Thud. The manager threw Natalie's personal belongings out of the door and yelled at her. "Get out of here. Don't let me see you here again." Chuck Cannon was quite satisfied with the house. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, and 3 bathrooms. Located in the downtown area, the business district was more prosperous and there was a lot of room for renovation. $3.5 million was paid in a lump sum graciously. The salesman had not seen such a rich man for a long time, and his face was full of admiration and envy. He then took the initiative to send Chuck back to the university. When he arrived at the university, Chuck nodded and said, "You can drop me here." The salesman smiled respectfully and said, "All right, take care, sir. The process of transferring the house should be completed tomorrow and you should be able to move in the day after tomorrow." Okay, Chuck nodded and decided to stay in an hotel for the time being for the next 2 days. However, what he wanted to know more was how Yvette would feel when she saw that his house was 3 or 4 times bigger than hers. When they arrived at the gate, Chuck first took out $20,000 before strolling into THTHE University. There were not many classes in the afternoon, but Chuck had already been absent for a whole class, because he had been held up outside for a while. Seeing Chuck walking into the classroom, Laura Jean sneered, "Who is this? Isn't this Chuck, the beggar of our class? I'm telling you, don't lend your money to such a person. When you lend him money, he acts as if you're his savior and bows to you. However, when you try to get the money back from him, he acts shamelessly like a scam trying to get off your money. Speaking of which, he hasn't paid me my money until now. Oh? This guy doesn't have parents, who knows which bastard he learned these tactics from?" The whole class burst into laughter.